The funding for this program is provided by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and the Friends of 4, 10, and 12.
It is our purpose today to ask you to consider the exchange of lands between the State Endowment and Diamond International Corporation.
The State Land Board will hold hearings tonight on Diamond International's plan to build a major resort on Priest Lake. Tonight, we'll look at that controversy. Good evening. In just about a half hour, the State Land Board will open hearings on a controversial plan to build a major resort on the east shore of Priest Lake in Idaho's Panhandle. Tonight's hearing at Priest River will be the first of two. A second will be held tomorrow in Sandpoint. Both hearings are expected to draw members of the Priest Lake Coalition, which has been fighting the project for more than a year now. Diamond International Corporation has extensive holdings around Priest Lake and has traditionally managed those lands for timber. But the resort Diamond wants to build would take more than the 5 miles of shoreline it currently owns, so the company is asking the state to make a land trade. Producer Gary Richardson has a report.
Located in the remote northwest of the state, Priest Lake is one of the least developed of Idaho's large lakes. Most of the shoreline of the 19-mile-long lake is public land. On the west side, the U.S. Forest Service manages several campgrounds and leases over 100 summer home sites. The east side is largely state school endowment land, interspersed with several thousand acres of timberland held by Diamond International, including about 5 miles of prime lakefront property. It is here that the timber company wants to trade with the state. Unveiling the proposal at the April meeting of the State Land Board in Boise, Diamond International spokesman Bowman Gray described the scope of the project.
The development depicted on these plans represent what we believe to be a state-of-the-art residential resort community. The project proposes land use elements that include detached single-family lots, attached single-family units, resort units and campground sites all of which are arranged in 5 distinct enclaves with recreational amenities that include lakeside beaches, ski facilities, golf courses, swimming, tennis and playground facilities, as well as extensive areas of open space.
Gray was careful to point out that the project's impacts would not be immediate.
There are those who envision that should the land exchange take place, that Diamond would automatically place onto the area at Priest Lake within the next 6 weeks 5,000 home sites, 3 golf courses, 27 tennis courts, and a ski resort. Ladies and gentlemen, that simply won't happen. The plan that you see in front of you and the plan that you will receive today, the summary of all the work that we've done to date, indicates a minimum of 20 years for the development of this particular project. It will take a long, long time. It will go very slowly.
Opposition to the project began almost immediately over a year ago when Diamond first asked for a land trade with the state and unveiled their plans at meetings in North Idaho.
We're opposed to the project mainly because of the pristine nature of Priest Lake and the fact that it is one of the most beautiful undeveloped lakes in the country, freshwater lakes, and a development of this size would potentially alter the water quality, the existing nature of the lake at the present time. I think with what they presented today, it has given us a good idea, answered some of our questions about their planning process and drawing up the plan. I just think that maybe they aren't looking at the long-term effects of a development of this nature. If you speculate what type of development, outside that proposed area, in the land trade area, what potentially could happen to the lake as a result of a major, Sun Valley type community up there.
I think that there are plenty of areas where people can go and do the kind of thing that they're talking about here with the skiing and all the marinas and all the other things that they're planning on doing here. There are areas where people can do that. They can go right down to Lake Pend Oreille and ski at Schweitzer and do all those things at the lake there. So I think that this is more of an issue of preserving something that is important for future generations to say, hey, this is still here, we've saved it, and you can learn you can learn from this.
For Diamond International will defend their proposal tonight. Members of the Priest River Coalition and others will attack it. The land board will listen, and we'll have a preview of all of that right now, beginning with the company's side. Bowman Gray is a member of the board of directors for Diamond International. He has had much of the chore of selling the resort idea to local residents so far. He'll try to do that again tonight. Mr. Gray joins us tonight in the studios of public television station KUID in Moscow. Mr. Gray, thank you for being with us.
My pleasure.
Let me ask you first about the scope of this project, regardless of how quickly it's going to happen. It's been compared to Sun Valley. It's been pointed out that it would be larger than Sandpoint. One state legislator has talked about, in essence, moving Coeur d'Alene to the shores of the lake. This is a big project, is it not?
Yes, it is a big project. I think that the comparison of moving Coeur d'Alene to the shore of Priest Lake is probably overstated. The permanent resident population at the end of the build period, which is some 20-odd years from now, is estimated to be just less than 4,000 people.
Make the case you've been making to the land board. Why should the people of Idaho, and particularly the residents of northern Idaho, go for this?
Well, I think that one has to look at the responsibilities of the land board, which I think Attorney General can speak to better than I can. The land board has the responsibility of funding the school system, as I understand it, and the land exchange that we propose will, in our view, admittedly, benefit the school, the endowment, by placing a larger amount of funds available than are currently available to the school systems. That is one side of it. The other is that the company has owned a considerable amount of land in northern Idaho around Priest Lake. The land which is on the lake today is beginning to be taxed as recreational land, and therefore we have to find other uses for it than timber cutting. And we have therefore gone and developed the Huckleberry Plan that you've seen in an attempt to make the best possible and considerate use of that land. I think that's
timber cutting just isn't economically feasible anymore.
Economically feasible in areas which are taxed and used for timber cutting down near the lake. We are now getting into the recreational land area. I think some of the master plans of Bonner County indicate long range that is the type of land that this is. And as your tax position changes, what you do with it has to change.
So it would be good for the company and presumably good for the school children of Idaho. How about northern Idaho residents? Do they get some benefits?
Well, yes, I would hope that they would see the building of a major ski resort, the building of a community of this size and scope up there as being a benefit in terms of the recreational possibilities. The other side of it is a question of taxation, which is a slightly complicated issue. It is our view that the generation of increased tax revenues to northern Idaho would be more than sufficient to offset the costs that any such development might have. I'm aware that there are arguments in that area, but I don't believe that there will be any burdens on the residents. And what they will have is a fabulous area that they can go to and use and enjoy.
Much of the concern here, at least some of the concern, comes from the fact that Diamond is now owned by an international, essentially an investment conglomerate, and that virtually all of Diamond's holdings, as I understand it, except the lands that we're talking about now, have been sold off already. What assurances can you give the land board of the role that Diamond will take if this trade is approved?
Well, I think that the assurances as to what happens to the land travel with the land. The Diamond has never pretended that we were real estate developers. I think I've said over the last 18 months that is not an area of expertise of the company, and we've never pretended that it was. We would look for the finest help that we could find in that area, and consistent with the plan that we put forward, try to build something that is consistent and tracks what we put out. The way to ensure that happens is for the company to enter into a development agreement with the local authorities which prescribe, in principle, what can and cannot happen. And the company has stated publicly that we're prepared to enter into such a development agreement with the local authorities to ensure that it's done in the way that everybody feels is the best.
Finally, let me ask you, opponents make a long list of arguments against this project, and we're going to hear some of them right now. But let me ask you about just one. Northern Idaho is a little bit different from southern Idaho in that its lakefronts tend to be much more privately owned, and the access tends to be more limited than people in southern Idaho are used to. How are you going to handle, how can you guarantee that public access will be sufficient at Priest Lake?
Well, if you have read the summary report, you will see that those areas which are beaches are specifically designated as open public areas. There are areas next to the beaches which are parking facilities, and all those amenities which would be considered desirable near the beaches are planned in the project. There is absolutely no idea of closing the beach areas off within the context of this plan at all.
Thank you. We'll come back in just a moment. Although some local residents do support Diamond's proposal, others do not. For their side of the story, we go to Art Manley. Mr. Manley is a former state senator, a prominent environmentalist in northern Idaho, and one of the founding members of the Priest Lake Coalition. He also joins us in Moscow. Mr. Manley, let me start with this question of access, because I know it's a concern of yours. Does the answer that you just heard, the answer that's in the proposal, does that satisfy you about that question?
Well, to a limited degree, but coming from Coeur d'Alene, where we have seen access shut off around most of our lakes, where it's very, very limited, and once you get on the lake, then we have very few opportunities to get off and enjoy the beaches and that sort of thing. So to the extent that Diamond will keep its present beaches open, I say that's a plus, and I am pleased for that. To the extent that they say that they'll also keep or not exchange for state waterfront property, that's fine too. But I'd point out that directly back of that estimated, by their estimate, 700 to perhaps 1,200 feet of open land on the state beaches, what's all open now, back of that is going to be this massive development. Their own beaches, I'm not sure what the extent, the depth of those beaches will be. I've heard the figure 400 feet. I don't know what it is for sure. But nevertheless, back of that, again, will be a massive, and I mean a massive development, particularly when we're talking about comparing with what we have now, which is virtually nothing.
Just fairly briefly, run down some of your other concerns. I know you have a long list.
Yes, the list, the list is so long that I don't know where to start.
Pick a few most important ones.
But of course, there will be a very definite impact, a detrimental, a real impact on fish and game resources. There'll be an added pressure on the fishery resource, excuse me, which is just now being rehabilitated after years of failures. Just the population, the increased number of boats and so on will be a tremendous impact. There will be a definite impact on the white-tailed deer herd, which winters on the east side of Priest Lake. Certainly the largest white-tailed deer herd in North Idaho and perhaps in the state. So-called mitigation features that I have seen are a myth. They just don't do anything. The discussion of 4,000 permanent residents ultimately in this project, in my view, is ridiculous when we're talking about 6,000 residential units that will be developed. They're not going to be empty half the year or a major part of the year, and certainly each will accommodate 2 or 3 people as a minimum. A ski resort with 4,400, ability to handle 4,400 people, that certainly is going to attract a lot of people. And they talk about this as a destination resort. Well, they're not going to go there for a day and go back home again. They're going to stay. So I think these population projections are all wet. I would like to see, incidentally, the major document that we have never been privileged to see, nor has the State Land Department seen, and that is an economic feasibility study, so that we could analyze that and see where they got some of these figures. But many other figures, the impact on schools, they say will not be great. The impact certainly will be. The Priest River schools, the Priest Lake School, they're full right now, and they can't absorb any more. Well, who pays for new schools? That doesn't come from the state. Those new schools come from the property taxpayers locally from a bond levy. Many other problems, For instance, we hear about how much benefit this is going to be to the endowment fund, the school endowment fund, and certainly the land board has an obligation to benefit that fund. But we're looking, if you put it in perspective, and I checked, the latest figure I have complete at home is the 1980 budget, and it showed that of the total public school budget, 0.5% came from endowment income. Now that's from the whole state, not only from Diamond, and that then is dispersed throughout the whole school system in the state of Idaho. That wouldn't even be peanuts for the local schools in the area, whether compared with the impact of the added population or not.
How about the other side of the economic impact question, though, the jobs and the contribution to the local tax base, both property and sales tax, that all this would certainly bring?
Certainly any development will bring jobs. Any construction development will bring jobs and more activity. But I would point out, for illustration, the Coeur d'Alene area in Kootenai County is one of the fastest growing areas in the state. Talk about jobs, yes, we had them in boom times, and we've had expansion there that you wouldn't believe, that would be way beyond this operation. Has it helped us as taxpayers? Has our economy been better? It's been more active, but if you ask the property taxpayers, they're all paying more than they ever did before. If you ask the local governments, whether it's a city, the county, the school districts, they're all having the toughest time they've ever had in their lives, and so I don't know that impact is all that great or all that beneficial over the long haul, particularly.
In your view, the economic balance is on the negative side?
I think it is over the long haul. I know there'll be jobs temporarily and there'll be income temporarily, and this is tempting. But I've heard the development story. I've been in the real estate business myself for the past 19 years. I'm a real estate broker. I've been involved in developments, and I have no objection to that sort of thing. But again, excuse me, again, I don't think the long-term impact is necessarily good, certainly not for the taxpayers.
Finally, and just very briefly, there have been some complaints about the land board's treatment of this issue so far. Has the land board been fair?
I think essentially the land board has been fair. I do have some problems. For instance, we understand that Diamond, or General Oriental, I think more appropriately now, has had something like a year and a half at least to develop all these plans. And as all developers are, they're in a hurry, and we have to proceed very quickly with everything. You know how long we've had to look at the appraisals that came through? We've had I think, just a day, less than a week, to look at those appraisals to see in our own mind how valid they are. Those land appraisals that affect both state and Diamond lands and the exchange that's involved. Not enough time to look at that, not enough time to look at any. There's been nothing available except those appraisals in the local land offices. There's been nothing available even in the Coeur d'Alene Library.
Maybe we can ask Mr. Gray about that in a little while. Thank you. We'll come back in just a moment. On the firing line in all of this, of course, is the State Land Board, a constitutional body made up of 5 elected officials, including Attorney General Jim Jones. The Land Board has already come under fire from some quarters for being too friendly toward the proposal. It has been asked not to let Diamond make its formal proposal again tonight. Mr. Jones, what's the answer to that? Does Diamond get another shot tonight?
Well, I think that according to the schedule worked up by the director of the Land Department, Diamond will have about 15 minutes or so to make a brief outline of what the proposal will be, and then we'll open it up to testimony and comments by the public so that they can have their say-so.
What about this concern that Mr. Manley raises, for both of them, that the economic feasibility study is not there, and also that they have not had a lot of time to look at these new?
Well, I suppose that all of us would like more time to look at these things. We are in the very preliminary stages of investigating this matter. And
when you say very preliminary, they first made the proposal over a year ago. Are we still quite a ways away from approval?
Well, I think that we have to have the opportunity as a land board to see what the economic benefits are going to be, because one of our primary considerations is the income potential of the public school endowment. From the preliminary indications we've seen, this project may have the possibility of enhancing that income potential. But I think that we have to study it in somewhat greater detail. We need to make sure that it does that. We need to make sure that if we do proceed with some kind of an exchange, we can appropriately and efficiently manage the rest of the forest that we have up there, because the public school endowment has a great deal of forestry property on the east side of Priest Lake, and we don't want to interfere with our management of that area. There's a potential that an exchange where Diamond and the state have interspersed holdings could be beneficial from the management standpoint.
Yeah, even some opponents of this plan do think that's a good idea, to block up the land holdings better than they are.
Right, and we have tried to make all of the material available within a short time of when we have received it. But I don't think it's appropriate to consider the amount of time that Diamond had to work up a proposal and say, okay, you have to have an equal amount of time to work up an opposition to it, because they did a lot of environmental studies. People were out on the ground, they were doing surveys and things of that nature, and it of course takes a great deal more time to prepare a case of that nature than it does to look at the findings and maybe try to contradict them or point out the weaknesses.
One legislator, Representative Jim Stoychev, who covers that area, contends that the Land Board doesn't have the authority to enter into land trades with private corporations, that clearly is in the hands of the legislature. Does he have an argument there?
No, I don't think that argument holds any water. I know it's been raised. It was raised at the hearing that we had in August. I had my staff check into it. They indicated that there does not seem to be any problem. You have to realize that the State Land Board is a constitutional body. It has a constitutional responsibility that we can't shirk and we can't get rid of to get the maximum long-term benefit from the state lands, and quite frankly, we haven't been doing as good a job as we should have.
Let me ask you about that, because I think that's the heart of the concern. I think Mr. Gray brought it up. I think Mr. Manley brought it up also. What can you consider? There are some local residents who really don't want this to happen. On the other hand, the Land Board has a constitutional mandate to manage those lands for the greatest dollar return, essentially. How tied are your hands in listening to these people up there tonight?
Well, the Constitution was changed in 1982 to use the language long-term return. And I think that gives us some flexibility. We can't completely disregard environmental impacts, social impacts, and I think that all of the board members are conscious of those types of impacts. Of course, our primary consideration is the economic well-being of the public school endowment, the income potential, and that's what we have to look at, number one. Number two, we look at the efficiency and management of our property. But I think that in looking at things in that regard, we can look at the social and economic impacts on the community and also the environmental impacts. And, you know, it may be after we study the matter that we decide there are other ways that we can increase the income potential of the public school endowment besides pursuing a trade. One of the reasons, a lot of people ask us, well, why are you talking with Diamond? Well, certainly where they're a major landholder in the area, they become the primary person to deal with if we're looking at enhancing the economic advantages of the endowment.
Let me ask you finally, just what would you anticipate the timetable would be?
It kind of depends, I think, on what kind of response we get tonight at the hearing and also tomorrow in Sandpoint. The department is busy looking at the appraisals that were done. They're also looking at the engineering and environmental studies. And I'm not exactly what stage they're in at the present time, but I would suspect that probably at our next land board meeting, we will not be in a position to say, okay, these are the specifics, but we may be able to give some guidance to Diamond one way or the other as to whether we can pursue a proposal and what the parameters would be that we would consider.
Let me go back to Mr. Gray. We don't have very much time left. How does that timetable sound to you?
Well, I think if we can reach a point in the not-too-distant future where there are some indication as to whether or not there is even the possibility of the land exchange, we'd be very pleased. As you probably know, in April, I asked that occur, and if we can do it in the not-too-distant future, I think we'd be pleased. I think too much substantial delay would not be beneficial to the project.
What's Diamond's fallback position? Suppose the board just says, no, we don't want to look at this land trade. What does Diamond do then?
Well, I would ask you to bear in mind that Diamond does own 5 miles of shorefront on Priest Lake and 15,000 acres. And we will have to look at that and deal with it in the most beneficial way that we possibly can for the company, whether it's cutting timber or selling lots on the lake. I've tried not to raise that issue particularly because I think we ought to focus on what is the real issue at hand, and that is the possibility of this development. If it doesn't go through, we'll have to reassess what we can do.
Well, since I've raised it, let me ask Mr. Manley about it too. Isn't that the very strong possibility, Mr. Manley, that if this does not go through, that the lands will just be broken up and sold for home sites anyway?
There surely is that possibility, and if that occurs, I think some of us would do our best to see if we couldn't buy some of that land for a public agency of some kind. Certainly that would be far preferable, in my view, to the development we're talking about. You know, we've had a number of leased lots on that same east side of the lake, and some lots are owned. The impact is not very great because those people occupy those lots, those home sites, principally during the summer. And in the winter, there's no problem with the deer habitat, the game habitat generally. There's very little activity up there. In fact,
so you could live with that.
Yeah, we're looking at 800 people up there year-round now, about 200 at the most on the east side of the lake, and most of those on the south. Certainly we could live with that as a much better alternative.
Jane, could I correct one impression?
Very briefly, yes.
Very briefly. We presented the plan that is being discussed here first last year, then a public meeting in August in Priest River, again in Boise in April of this year, and also in Sand Point in April of this year, and placed copies of the report in 3 different libraries in the area in the middle of April. So it has been generally available to the public, which is as long as it's been available to the land board or to us for the same amount of time. I wanted to correct that misconception.
Thank you for doing that.
Let me point out.
You've got about 20 seconds, Mr. Manley.
Jane, that those libraries included Priest River, or Priest Lake, which is open a couple half days a week, Sand Point, which I think is regular, Coeur d'Alene, nothing ever. So, and the proposals presented have been at least 3. They vary each time. They're modified each time as we go down the road.
Thank you. I don't think you and Mr. Gray are going to agree on that today, or probably much of anything else, and we are out of time. I'd like to thank you, Bowman Gray and Art Manley in Moscow, and Attorney General Jim Jones in Boise. That's all the time we have for tonight. We'll be back tomorrow night. I'm Jean McNeil. Good night.
The funding for this program is provided by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and the Friends of 4, 10, and 12.